if anybody ever had a good reason to hold a grudge, was Joseph, son of Jacob. I mean, yeah, sure. Maybe he was his father's favorite son, and maybe he did lord it over his brothers more than a little bit. But nothing could have given him them justification to do what they did. They attacked him. They beat him. They stripped him naked. They threw him in a pit with the intention that he should die there. Then they pulled him out of the pit, sold him into slavery, and lied about the whole thing to their father. A lot of people, everybody really, has had things happen in their lives, have had people in their lives who have hurt them or wounded them, even done evil things to them. I mean, if the statistics are all correct, there must be more than a few people in this room at this very moment who could tell us stories that would make our hair curl. But no matter what you have suffered, no matter what you have struggled through, you have to be sympathetic to a guy like Joseph. You have to be angry at the brothers who would do what they did to him. This morning I have been asked, and a number of people told me that, have been asked to answer a very, very difficult question. A question that goes to the heart of the very idea of forgiveness and of the pain and sorrow that we carry around in us because we have been wounded. I have been asked to explain how do you forget after you forgive. And I could probably take the easy road and treat that as a theoretical question. I could talk about the theology of forgiveness. I could talk about the neurology of memory. But that wouldn't get us anywhere. Because this question is not a theoretical question. It is a deeply personal question. And indeed one that many people struggle with moment by moment, day by day, as they carry with them the burdens and the wounds that they have from the things that people have done to them. So I need to deal with it as a personal question. And that's why I turned to the story of Joseph. The story of Joseph is one of the most personal stories that is told in the entire Bible. And it speaks directly to this whole issue. For Joseph had terrible things done to him, and Joseph, through a long and difficult process, came to forgive his brothers for what they had done to him. Joseph, despite what his brothers had done to him, finally landed on his feet in the country of Egypt. In fact, he more than landed on his feet, he ended up running the whole place. And that gave to him a wonderful opportunity to take revenge on his brothers for what they had done to him. They come to him in a time of famine in Canaan, begging for food, and they do not recognize their long-lost brother. Joseph has all the power. He could take incredible revenge on his brothers at this point. But Joseph is a tender-hearted man, and he wants to forgive his brothers. But there's just one issue. He's really not sure if he can trust them. And trust, by the way, is always a legitimate issue when you have been hurt by someone in your life. It only makes sense. If someone has hurt you in your life, they have the potential of hurting you again. And so if you hesitate to trust them, that is not an indication of some failure on your part to have a forgiving spirit. That's just wisdom and prudence. Because when someone hurts you, hurt does not happen in a vacuum, it happens in a relationship. And because of that, trust gets broken in a relationship, and once trust has been broken, it cannot be magically restored. In fact, it takes a great deal of time and a great deal of work to reestablish trust once it has been broken. Say, for example, you had somebody in your life who betrayed you by defrauding you of a sum of money. A horrible thing to do, I agree. But worse things happen in relationships all the time. So somebody defrauds you of money and you decide, because it is your right and your decision, to forgive that person that you love. And then they come to you 6 months later with some get-rich scheme, inviting you to invest in it. Do you have to, at that point, because you forgave them, therefore trust everything that they are saying and give them some money? Of course not. And if you fail to do so, that is no indication that you have not forgiven them. Because trust doesn't just, it doesn't just reestablish itself. It is only something that can be rebuilt over a great deal of time and with a great deal of work on both parts. And sometimes it cannot even be rebuilt at all. But no one should ever expect that it just magically reappears. So trust is a legitimate issue. And it's always harder, in fact, to rebuild than it was to establish in the first place, which is why you don't want to break it. Never underestimate the effort it will take to rebuild trust. So that's what Joseph does. He chooses to forgive his brothers, and he begins, therefore, that process of rebuilding trust. He does it at first by giving them a test. He does not reveal his identity, and he tests them to see whether they have learned anything from their previous crimes. It turns out that they have, and so the beginnings of trust, reestablishment, rebuilding, can happen. But it's a long process. And many years later, in fact, when Joseph's brothers come to him at the occasion of the death of their father, there is still work to do. They still need to come in contrition and repentance, and another step is taken in the rebuilding of that trust relationship. But before we can get to the celebration of their ultimate reconciliation, I need to step back in the story of Joseph in Egypt. Many years earlier, an interesting little something happens. Joseph, at this point, has overcome everything that's happened to him. He's overcome what his brothers have done to him. He has, even though he arrived as a slave in Egypt, and he went from being a slave to a prisoner accused falsely of rape, he, with God's help and with an uncanny ability to interpret dreams, has risen. And he's put his life together. And he has it all. He has wealth and power. He has a beautiful Egyptian wife. Everything's going well for him. He has every reason to be happy and content. Do you know what? There's something holding him back. Something that is still keeping him from being everything that he was meant and created to be. And so God visits Joseph in Egypt with two incredible gifts. Joseph had two sons, it said. Joseph named the firstborn Manasseh, for he said, God has made me forget all my hardship and all my father's house. And the second he named Ephraim, for God has made me fruitful in the land of my misfortunes. So God blesses Joseph with children, and children, of course, are always a sign of promise, of new beginnings, of hope, new opportunities. And Joseph chooses to name his firstborn son Manasseh. And Manasseh, you need to understand, sounds like the Hebrew phrase that means to cause to forget. So by calling his son Manasseh, what Joseph is saying is that he has experienced forgetfulness in Egypt. And my first question upon reading that is, what on earth does that mean? Does that mean that Joseph is saying that the actual memory of the things that happened to him in Canaan have been taken out of his active memory, out of his brain? You know, there was a movie made a few years ago. It was called Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And it tells a story, it's a science fiction, it's set in the future, and it tells the story of a couple. Two people who fall in love, who love each other deeply, but then go through a very, very difficult, painful breakup. And these two people are so very wounded by what happened to them, by the hurtful things they did to each other through that breakup, that they each individually decide to go through a new scientific process to actually remove the memories of each other from the synapses of their brains. Is that what Joseph is talking about? Is he saying that his memory is wiped clean? That's sometimes, of course, what we crave when we've been hurt in the past. We just wish that the memory of those things could be wiped away. But that is not what Joseph means. He still remembers these things. When his brothers do show up in Egypt years later, he has absolutely no trouble recognizing them. He remembers them. He knows precisely why he hesitates to trust them when he sees them. The memory of those things are still very much part of who he is. And the memories of the things that happen to us, even the painful, traumatic things that happen to us, are part of who we are. They help to make us who we are. They help, in many cases, to bring out the best in us, because God makes that happen. I mean, if Joseph did not remember what he had suffered in Canaan, he probably would not have been the leader that he was in Egypt. Those memories form us, tell us who we are. So whatever Joseph means when he calls his son Manasseh, he doesn't mean that the events have disappeared from his brain. What he's talking about, in fact, when he calls his son Manasseh, is a different kind of forgetting. He's talking about the kind of forgetting that lets you hold on to the events that happened, but leave behind the hurt and the pain and the sorrow and the anger and everything that weighs you down because of what you suffered. Now, some people try to do that sometimes by, the eternal sunshine of the spotless mind method, by wiping those things clear, by pretending that they didn't happen, pretending that they didn't hurt like they really did. But that never works. It never works, because those events are with you and part of who you are. So the different kind of forgetting, the Manasseh kind of forgetting, involves, in fact, the opposite. It involves, in fact, going back and reliving some of that pain, some of that sorrow, some of that anger, going through it again, in a sense, but doing it with one different dimension. Doing it accompanied all along by the extraordinary, boundless love of God. It is possible to go back and relive those events with the redeeming presence and power of God. That's the kind of forgetting, the Manasseh kind of forgetting that we all need to a certain extent in our lives. Because it's the kind of forgetting that lets you leave those things behind. Leave behind not the events, but the bitterness and the anger and the sorrow and the wounding. So you can get on and move on to become the person you were always created to be. Joseph's second son, he calls Ephraim. And Ephraim means in Hebrew double fruitfulness. Double fruitfulness. So Ephraim represents God's desire to give to you abundance, fruitfulness, purposefulness, all kinds of good things in your life. But I think it's important to remember that Ephraim comes after Manasseh. That sometimes in order to experience all the abundance and the fruitfulness and the blessing God wants to give to you, you have to go through Manasseh. You have to go back, and you have to, with God's help, let go of that bitterness and that anger and everything you carry around that weighs you down. It's not easy to do that. It's not easy to open up that memory vault. But it does open the door to Ephraim. It is God's desire for you that you should experience in your life abundance, blessing, fruitfulness. That's what you were created for. It doesn't mean, of course, abundance of possessions. It doesn't mean that you get everything that you want. But it does mean that God desires for you to have meaning and purpose and a sense of fullness in your life. And God's willing to get you there. Now, how you actually do that, how you can actually go back and relive and let go of some of that bitterness and sorrow and anger, we're going to get into a little bit more, especially when we get into the season of Lent. But for the moment, I just want to say that it begins, as many things do, with choosing to trust in God. Forgiveness is a difficult thing. Manasseh, forgetfulness, is a difficult thing. But it's a worthwhile thing, and it opens up the door to all kinds of possibilities and hopefulness. And it is God's will for you. Let us take a few moments in silent reflection.